All right, let's make a formal introduction for our listeners. Good afternoon, Steve. My name is Claudia. I'm calling you from Washington, D.C., from the Student Fairfax City. We're very humble and grateful that Steve Roach accepted our invitation to our show. Steve, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you so much. Glad to meet you and to be part of your legacy of your show that's building here.
Thank you very much, man. Let's go back to the beginning in your life, Steve. Were you born like in a musical family? I mean, how old were you when you perhaps began taking, guitar lesson or piano lesson way before the keyboards?
Right. So I'm an only child, and I was born in San Diego, California. And my father came out of the military and went directly to work at a missile factory, essentially, in the early days of building missiles that helped put man on the moon. And eventually that turned into defense missiles and that sort of thing. So he was a working class family that I was born into and grew up in as an only child. And there was no musicians, no brothers and sisters, no real pathway towards that kind of creative life. But what was really influential early on from growing up in San Diego was that the desert and mountains and ocean were all together there in one day. I could visit all of that in one day. So that kind of connection to the natural world had a big influence on me as a young person. And ultimately, there was feelings that would be activated especially in the desert, that expansiveness, the deep quiet that I was already resonating with as a youngster and as a young guy with a creative mind already. It was very, very much desiring the kind of spaces that you get to through more refined, let's say, soundscapes. So, the desert environment, the sounds of the desert, that sort of thing. So that was really, I always attribute my first sonic influences as that bridge between silence and sound and this kind of inner place that gets activated when you're in these more solitary and refined natural environments.
Perfect, man. I think when you were, I don't know, in high school or you were 15, 16, what kind of music were you listening? Were you buying vinyl? I mean, music was part of your life back
Yeah,
then?
absolutely. I mean, early memory would be, early Donovan and early the Seeds and the early kind of pop and psychedelic music being the age that I, am now at 68 years old, but coming up through like the late 60s, and you had the whole sort of confluence of the 60s music and hippie culture, which I wasn't really connected to, but the music and the influence of the psychedelic culture that was coming through the music, early Pink Floyd, absolutely there. And quite quickly, I was hungering for this music that had some kind of, and I couldn't really explain it directly at that time, but I was drawn towards music that gave me the feeling that I was getting, as I just expressed about, in these natural environments. So I started hearing the progressive music of the day, especially the music of Yes. And so at the beginning of Yes album, like Close to the Edge, for example, there's that soundscape in the beginning, and I wanted that space to go on for an hour. That sounded like a symphony, of a natural symphony that was tuning and warming up, and I just really wanted to be immersed in that kind of place. And then the same within Pink Floyd's early soundscape music I was more interested in the pieces that moved away from traditional blues or rock or that kind of formation of songs, but more into soundscape music. Early on, I was always craving and looking for that direction.
And your parents, so well, this kid really like music, is buying vinyl. Before you bought your first keyboard, were any pressure to kind of go to school and forget about music? Your parents telling you, forget about this hobby, but you're not going to make any money, in the music world, or you have freedom to explore whatever you wanted to do in your life?
No, that's a great relevant question. And I mean, early on, were happy that I was listening to music, holed up in my bedroom alone. That was like they could keep an eye on there a lot easier.
Of course, yeah.
So, but and they, again, coming from working class, I mean, there wasn't this big push to go to college. It was more like you got to, it's time to look for a job or decide what you're going to do. And so I was kind of left to my own devices to figure out and find my way. My mom was really very much supportive as in terms of me following this instinct of being an artist. She could see I had this artist feeling and this vision in me, and I was doing some painting early on and was really creative with my hands, building things. So she was supporting that kind of natural, but really not really, there was no real direction or focus on it at that point. But eventually, the love of music landed me a job in a local independent small record store that was, of course, it was all about vinyl. And so my first record that I ever owned, it would have been the White Owl or Sgt. Pepper's and Magical Mystery Tour. But the album that really lit me up was the first album by the band Spirit.
Yeah.
That first, the California psychedelic band Spirit, that there was aspects of that music I'm still haunted by, like some of the string arrangements by Lou Adler on there. And there was just an atmosphere to that was very evoking of these kind of spaces that exist in between worlds. I like to say there's like these feelings of perception you cannot put words to easily or at all. So that's where a lot of music would start to illuminate these feelings that we all have as human beings. If some folks tune into it really early on or at some point, and then any kind of all types of genres of music can live in those in between worlds or in those vast genres that became so popular when music was especially nurtured through the natural, intuitive, creative instincts rather than boardroom meetings like now where they construct music really specific for an audience and that sort of thing, where we grew up and at this point when music was really coming from on the most part a really pure and evolutionary state of development through all sorts of things that were happening within the culture at our age and at that time, where there was a lot of experimentation on a lot of levels, whether it be drug experimentation or meditation or immersive states from nature. All of that stuff was there and available, especially in Southern California, where you have idyllic weather and you have incredible, like I say, landscapes, where one day I would wake up in the desert, have lunch in the mountains, and then watch the sunset at the ocean, all in one day, but all with a soundtrack that would be, in my vehicle mapped out for that journey. I would have early Vangelis or Pink Floyd or Tangerine Dream, all that whole menu of music that would allow your imagination to really soar. And this was all before I was creating music myself. I was working in the record store, and I was getting imports coming in every week from Gem Records in Southern California. They were the big importer on the West Coast that would bring in everything on vinyl, the early material, No Pussyfooting, early Tangerine Dream, all the early Klaus Schulze, all the Steve Hillage, all the great electronic stuff that was coming out of Europe and the UK and Italy and all over the world, essentially. So we'd crack these boxes open every Friday or Saturday, and it was just mind-blowing. You're just like you're being opened up to this universe of music and musicians at the time that just seemed like, even though Klaus and Chris Franck and Tangerine Dream was maybe 5 or 6 years older than me, it felt like these were musical entities that had been around for eons, in terms of the mystery of that and the whole allure of this coming out of Europe and Germany and all the European countries. So when it was coming in, there was a great deal of magic around that when it was, in the early days. Just couldn't even imagine that each week, the kind of adventure you could go on with the vinyl coming in.
Yeah, and imagine that, for you opening your first record store, opening and playing, I don't know, early Tangerine Dream stuff, you thought to yourself, man, that's exactly what I meant to do. With my life, I really like that kind of music. And, you were like a kid in a candy store, the Klaus Schulze, the Tangerine Dream, I don't know, Peter Baumann and Manuel Goschel and all
Yeah,
the people I
exactly.
admire, so.
No, that's exactly it. And again, it was at a time to where when you were phasing out of the more, what we'll say, more traditional progressive music, which had its place. And, I was quite into Yes, as I was saying, but when I still remember at this moment when I pulled Time Wind out and played it for the first time, and it was like I was in a dark, it would, like, the metaphor would be you've been living in kind of a darker room, and when I put that on, all the lights went on. Everything was illuminated in my own consciousness and in my imagination for creativity. And that's the album that really, I always say, it always turned all the lights on for me. And I just felt at that moment so drawn to finding the instruments that would make this kind of music. And it had that same sort of feeling I was looking at the beginning of Close to the Edge, where it wasn't 3 minutes, it was 30 minutes long. And then you could.
Absolutely.
So at that point, I wrote Klaus Schulze a letter, and as a young guy with enthusiastic about discovering his music, like I'm sure thousands of people, young folks did at that time. But he wrote me back and he asked exactly the right questions. It's, do you have an echo machine? ARP string ensemble, great choice. 2600, yes, awesome. Great. Whatever, you wouldn't say awesome then, but he would say great. Yeah. So it was like getting, the darshan with the master. He's like, yes, you're there and there. And so, I still have the letter from him that I received 48 years ago or something.
Wow.
So from that point, so the segue between the record store and then having a 2600, an ARP 2600, and an ARP string synthesizer, which again, that instrument, I said I could just play concerts for people sitting on the couch in my apartment, just playing chords on that. I love that sound through an echo machine. But at that time, the cost of that was outrageous. For a young guy who's working a job, basically I was working in a small factory building microwave antennas for communication. It's just again, you're making things as on a production line kind of deal. So when I heard that music, I had to find where do these instruments come from? Even at the time, those instruments would be like going out and digging for gold, and where does that come from? And then once you find them, they had the price of gold attached to them. They were so expensive, in the late 70s. So, and my parents were always emphasizing to me, if you want something, you go out and work for it, and then you'll get it through your own work. So they didn't have the money to support or eventually they'd kick in here and there when they saw how hard or how much I was devoting to do this. But ultimately I went and secured a very high interest loan, 25% loan, and was able to buy $4 or $5 grand worth of electronic, tools, synthesizers, just exactly what I wanted at that time. And then it was validated by Klaus's letter, but between the gear and itself, it was about $8,000 investment for a guy who could, barely put gas in his car, So that was sort of what I always refer to as like the born again synthesizer fervor, where it just, nothing was going to get it. I had to have the tools and I couldn't wait. I tried to go to a college that had a junior college that had electronic music courses. And the pace at which they were moving at and the things they were teaching, I just felt like I'm going to just die on the vine here if I stay in this school, in this class, trying to learn electronic music. It was moving along at a snail's pace. And my mind was just racing towards, I just have to get my hands on the instruments. And when I did, it just clicked. I felt like I already know intuitively how to do this. I instinctively felt drawn to the way you make sounds on synthesizer. And so that's where I taught myself the rudiments of music from using the synthesizer. So I'm fully self-taught. I do not read music, but I was gathering up theory books and studying and learning about the foundations of music from more of an academic perspective. But I was not. I just early on I knew I did not fit in an academic paradigm. I just couldn't operate in a classroom with that all the things that happen where you have different levels of people with that are more advanced or less advanced, but there's this kind of thing that restricts certain minds, I think, from growing when you have that kind of comparison going on. So I just knew as an only child, I'm easily entertained alone in my room. So if I have a room full of synthesizers and time, there it is. So that was like that's the origin story right there of the whole deal.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then, like, you were doing things on your own pace, right? So you could stay, all night long playing and learning stuff for 2 hours a day, right? So there was not going to school from 6 to 10, whatever, to learn what you were at a different level. And perhaps that's the only way to learn on your own.
Yeah, you get that 10,000 hour thing clocked in real quick,
Exactly, right. So at the time, Berlin always had been, the Berlin School of Music, or perhaps the capital of the electronic music in the world. But at the same time, in Italy in the 70s, at the beginning when Genesis did their first gigs there, there was a lot of progressive music, like PFM and Banco, and there were a lot of great music.
Right.
Not necessarily electronic, but
Sensations Fix.
Yep.
You remember those guys there?
Yeah. And so they were on one hand, a lot of experimental, and then band trying to imitate Pink Floyd, but a lot of electronic, right? A lot of people can forgive us. So it was, great times in music, So
yeah,
so both coming from Italy and coming from Berlin in particular, right? So
yeah, and then you had that just the seeds that were being planted around the world, but especially in Europe. And at that time, as an import, if you were absorbing all the imports that were coming in, like you say, there was all of this coming from France, from Italy, from Germany, of course, from the UK, and all of that continued to find its way over here and inspire a lot of the American composers and electronic musicians that I'm sure you're interviewing and have interviewed.
Yeah, correct. And also at the same time, a lot of people in the electronic music world, not just Tangerine Dream, but I don't know, bands like Bubble Boo, right? We're doing music for Werner Herzog movies. So
absolutely,
when you have whatever, a science fiction movie or a horror movie, they're always going to be, or suspense movie, always keyboard, and then, in the background to facilitate whatever the director want to do in a particular thing. So since early day, music, electronic, right? Whether you're a consumer like myself, or you a producer like yourself, they were,
and we were all listening in like the Suspiria soundtracks and that sort of thing, and all of that. It was just, you could be voracious collecting. I mean, you could have, like you are, like I know, and I was, and not so much vinyl now, but I still have thousands of CDs. And at that time, amazing record collection. I mean, that was how we learned and how we
absolutely.
There was this whole wave of inspiration that was happening on so many levels. And but then, again, the Klaus Schulze piece for me, it just hit such a nerve. And then those early Tangerine Dream albums, in particular, Phaedra, Rubicon, and Ricochet, those three albums.
Wow, those are classic, man. Yeah,
that's the triad right there. I mean, that's still holy ground. Those three albums right there for me, along with Time Wind and Mirage, Picture Music. Those were the ones that. It's just like, you could call it, if you're, like the Old Testament, that's like where it's all at right there,
So you sent a letter to Klaus Schulze. Have you ever wrote to Edgar Froese at the time, or Vangelis, or one of those
actually, what was cool is eventually I met Klaus when I was playing at a big concert in Netherlands. Eventually I played in 1991 at Klimdag, which was the biggest electronic festival at the time. There was 4,000 people there. I mean, Klaus came and they had a huge vendors area. And again, 4,000 people would come to these each year, Klim Day. And Klaus came just, he came to experience it, and he knew I was playing, and he had heard of me by that point, and obviously I'd written him, whether he remembered that or not. But he sought out my booth, and we met and spoke and talked and just connected, and that was fantastic. And by that time, I had already worked with Michael Shreve, who he worked with, obviously, earlier on. And so that was like an obvious connection there between Klaus and I. Was working with Michael, and I had performed concerts with Michael and that sort of thing. So, and then eventually in Los Angeles, in the scene there that I was thriving in and building in LA at that point, I was playing hundreds of concerts in LA in the early 80s. Yeah. And one concert, Chris Franck came to my concert with his girlfriend, and it was in this beautiful garden in Venice Beach, right there in LA, classic Venice Beach scene. But it was an outdoor festival with Kevin Brahini and this guy called Francisco and his Cosmic Beam, and he had this 14-foot beam like Michael Stearns plays. You know what the beam is?
Yeah.
Strings on it. It's like a bass guitar that you could hear a half a mile away. So that was an afternoon concert. So Chris came and we met, and I just remember him just hanging out in this beautiful sunny afternoon, and he was moving between beers and iced tea or something, and so, or coffee, that's what it was, coffee and beers, hanging out with and watching my set. And then he actually came to my house the next day because I was scoring a video for a well-known video artist of the day, David M. Like it's the letter M, and he was he did Herbie Hancock's Future Shock cover. So he was a visual artist, and we were always looking for visual artists at the time. So Chris heard I was doing the soundtrack for this David M's video, and so he came over and wanted to see his work. So he paid a visit to my little apartment in Culver City there in Los Angeles near the beach. And again, that's like having the Dalai Lama come to your house when you're just starting out. It's like, wow. Oh my God, you sort of get that another one of those affirmations that you're on the right track.
Absolutely.
So Chris was absolutely very cool and just really kind and suggesting different thoughts about some gear to use and whatnot. And so eventually then I, in the same time period, because Chris and Edgar were in LA a lot doing film work, then there was this studio where they used to animate the Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoon shows and on Sunset Boulevard, but it was taken over by some visual animators that I worked with that were doing really state-of-the-art, really abstract visual material. And so they were in the old studios where you had Rocky out, this big cement figure, if you know that, those cartoons from back in the day with the Rocky and the Bullwinkle sort of thing. It was just very surreal is the point I'm trying to make. But I walk in and then Edgar's there and he's looking and reviewing their work. And Edgar was a different story from Chris, where Edgar, there was a quality of just, I was absolutely intimidated, he was friendly, but still really very intense and more stoic. And it's Edgar, what can you say, and he's a big guy, and I'm like 6'2" on a good day, but he seemed like he was about 8'9" or something, his presence was so big. So those were cool memories from that period. But through all that, in my time in LA, after I left San Diego and I jumped into the creative current of just playing and being immersed in electronic music 24/7, it hasn't let up till it's happening for 45 years now, just continuous straight through. So.
But then, I don't know, Astra Temple or Manuel Goshin, those people were the same people that I admire, especially Manuel Goshin. And a great musician coming out of that age, man. So eventually I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I absolutely, all the Astra, New Age of Earth, and Inventions for Electric Guitar and Correlations. Wow. I mean, all those were
paradise, man.
Those were the de facto essentials. You had to have that in in your vocabulary musically and as reference points, and the inspiration of that would feed you, but it would also direct you to an area like, well, that's been done now. I want to do something that of my own that's not
your music, your type of music,
that's
right?
inspired by that. So that's where structures came from at that point. Structures from silence. Yeah.
I will ask you about that. So eventually, you left the record store, you saved the money, you buy your equipment, you were at home like a nerd, learning everything your own. And then you say, well, I need to start putting my music out there. How difficult was to put the first vinyl out there, the first output that you end up creating?
Right. So the first thing I was recording onto cassette all the time, and that I would record live, everything I was doing onto cassettes there in this little downstairs bungalow apartment in San Diego County. And eventually that little record store I was working at, it brought in this magazine called Synapse Magazine, and that magazine was out of LA, and it was published by these electronic artists at the time who had a band called Mobius, electronic trio called Mobius, or a duo, there was four guys. I mean, they switched out, but eventually, then this is not the European Mobius, as in Mobius and Rodelius. This is that group from LA that was Mobius.
Hans Rodelius is different from the Mobius.
Yeah, this was more of almost like Kraftwerk, kind of new wave. Combining things. So these guys that had that electronic group, there was a trio, and they brought me in with my gear eventually, but they were all graduates from CalArts Studios. So they were studying with Morton Subotnick and Harold Budd, and they were a bit older than me, but they could see how completely possessed I was and to do electronic music. So they invited me to move up to LA, and they helped me get my start up there. And so from that point, then everything, started to fall into place. I was doing a lot of concerts with them, starting to record my own music, continuing on with cassette. And then eventually I created my first release, Now, and that was primarily recorded all with pieces from cassette. So at that time in LA, the word was out about myself and some other electronic artists that were playing out a lot. There was not a lot of electronic musicians doing non-academic music, i.e. meaning music that was more European or inspired by Klaus or Tangerine Dream and all the music we've been talking about. You could find a lot of academic, concerts, and which were really, really approaching from more of an intellectual, conceptual place, but the more visceral, driving sequencer kind of thing. That I was doing that like early on in LA, so it would draw the attention, of a lot of people that way. So eventually, there was a guy who worked at Chrysalis Records at the time. That was, Jethro Tull's label, and Pat Benatar and the pop music kind of stuff. But he's right there on Sunset Boulevard. But he was hearing my concerts, so he in Venice Beach and around. So he's the guy that brought the idea of first producing and putting up the money, which was a great deal of money at that time to put out your first album. Yeah. So he helped me produce my album, which came out on vinyl. The first album was Traveler, and that had the influences of the European school, but I was very specific in that those pieces on Traveler would be. And on Now was my first release, and he heard that on cassette. And then the next one we did was Traveler. But the big piece there was that I wanted to work in shorter time frames, not half an hour sidelong pieces like we were hearing from the Berlin School, and especially, and all the music that was 20. Well, at that time you could squeeze 30 minutes on the side of a vinyl if you obviously didn't cut the grooves too deep, but
that's right.
Time Wind was 30 minutes aside. So, but my feeling was I grew up in this completely different part of the world, and all the influences of Southern California, and also realizing I'm not wanting to draw a tracing paper around. I mean, I was inspired and deeply inspired and motivated and moved by the music from Europe. But I was really feeling like I wanted to create more of a journey that was varied, where you'd move through a lot of different landscapes, parallel with desert, mountains, ocean, canyons, all that sort of landscape as a metaphor journeys within a set of all these different pieces. So when you listen to Now, Traveler, Impetus, even, those albums in particular had the sequential and it had the roots from Europe, but it was much more varied in terms of the moods and the feelings. Some pieces were really bright and real full of sunlight, and others were more atmospheric and darker, that would suggest where I would go later on with Magnificent Void or Mystic Chords or something. But in the middle of all that, this whole other piece came through, which was Structures from Silence. I don't know if you want to speak to that now, or
Yeah, that's a masterpiece, man. I tell you, man, I own electronic music. I don't know, at least 1,500 vinyls. Mostly have most vinyl nowadays, but I love it. That's a masterpiece, Steven. I know you're a very humble guy, I'm quiet guy, but I tell you, for a consumer point of view, and I listen to a lot of stuff, pop, jazz, rock, electronic, the Wendy Carlos, the Susan Ciani, and the Tangerine Dream, Peter Bauman, Klaus Schulze, all these people. That was my probably top 50 albums. It's hard to decide which one is the best one, but it's a masterpiece. And you were very young. I mean, that's the thing, And the other thing that surprised me, that nowadays, kids go to that expensive school or Berkeley School of Music or this or that. You knew what you wanted to do early life. You had very supporting parents. You bought equipment, on a 25% interest rate. You learn on your own. People don't understand. Back then, there wasn't no internet. There was no YouTube where you can look at videos. Now you go to YouTube to do a video to do everything, or to, water the plants. You can do a video on YouTube, and it wasn't a smartphone. You figure out your own. That's even more remarkable. How does that work? Cassette, write in a piece of paper. Okay, when I do this oscillator or sequencer, if I move this knob or this too much, whatever, you did everything on your own, and that album now is a masterpiece, Steven.
Well, thank you for all of what you're sharing there. And
yeah,
there's no question that when I had the inspiration and the compulsion to do this music, that I was looked at by everybody around me, including my parents, outside of my mom, who's going to love her son, through it all. But I mean, people just said, what in the hell what is this? What are you even wasting what is this? There's no reference point, nothing. It was already, the European-based music coming in was already, you were kind of out on the edge of being a freak when you were listening to, a lot of that music.
Right.
Just, we're kind of on the outside, but that was even more fuel for me. Was I just have this feeling, and I know that this is something that I'm just so nourished by, and it felt so natural to me to create that way. It wasn't like, well, I'm going to become a painter of abstract Mark Rothko type paintings or something. I mean, I was drawn into that world, and yeah, absolutely. I mean, that we learn from the vinyls that you're speaking about, and then you're not instantly now you get any synthesizer, you get it from wherever you're buying it from, and then you go online, and within a half an hour you've got everybody's mapped it all out for you, how to use it, and there's advantages of that, and I use it now, and for technical virtual manuals, and to save time having to dig deep to find out how to do one little function that's buried way under the hood somewhere. But that exploratory process of what Eno calls idiot glee, is you can learn things, and it's not about being an idiot, but it's the glee, but it's the joy, it's the freedom of discovery without the boundaries or without the traditional, like I said, going to a college to learn electronic music would it just I could have been there 15 years before any of that happened. So there something was very, very, very much highly I would say developed in me as an artist with sound that was beyond my years and beyond my knowledge as just a day-to-day young guy in Southern California. But there was like some kind of emotional, spiritual crossroads that I was tapping into, and those instruments were giving me instant access to this place that I might not have ever found without taking the high interest loan or putting myself at great financial risk and or whatever. But having that courage, basically there's the courage to really create is what I always want to inspire people to do on your own terms. And that's what, so much of my music, my music's born from that spirit of just like this kind of pioneering spirit of going off and just going for it. And then what comes back is what you find when you're out there exploring right here in my time house that I'm talking to you from. So, and then you would be validated along the way with certain albums that would hit a certain sweet spot for people. Now was already my first cassette release, hit a lot of nerves and people in a good way. And then Traveler, the same. But then soon, I was like within 6 years, then Structures came through. And Structures really came through in a moment where when you hear the title track, the time that it takes to hear that piece is how long it took to create that piece. It was just made as you hear it. It was recorded on the Oberheim, and I had a digital sequencer that was recording what I was playing. And once I played that piece, I just hit stop and play, and then it played everything right back, but it was still digital. It wasn't recorded to tape. So then I could live with it and fine tune the tempo and do very subtle changes of the filter and changing qualities of the sound. And so I lived with it for a couple of months, and then I went into a nice studio, but it was all still live, and it was all what the original first pass of Structures is what we recorded onto a high-end reel-to-reel. And that became that piece. And then Reflection and Suspension, that was recorded onto a Nakamichi, a very high-end, but it was still a cassette. It was a metal cassette master is what that piece was. For Reflections and Suspension, the first track on Structures. So this is the sort of the genealogy of that album. And then Quiet Friend was my first recording on a Tascam 4-track. So I was actually, I'm able to record the first part down and come back and compose and layer it in parts because I was so used to recording live. But all those pieces were recorded between, I'd say, 1982 and 83 over the course of about a year. But when recording them, I was not thinking of, I'm making an album here. I set out to make an album, Structures from Silence. It was nothing to do with that. It was all to do with being this young, on the edge, living guy, hardly able to afford food, living in Los Angeles, crazy, absolutely incredibly crazy city to live in, at that time. Now is, I'm sure, more than ever. But at night, it would get really calm and really deeply still and quiet. And I lived about 8 miles inland from the ocean. So that feeling again of desert, sanctuary, space, the quality of tone, silence between the notes, all of that was really coming back. It was available to me. So it was like I was able to take all of those years of the desert and breathe it into this kind of music that would then nourish me and give me a sense of safety and support and comfort in the middle of this crazy world of LA. So it was really all about creating music just for me and for my well-being and for my mental health and my stability to create a sanctuary in a way that it's doing still 40 years later now for people, so It's just that there was nothing grandiose about it. It was like I'm creating it out of an absolute incredible need to be immersed in that space.
Absolutely. And then so you put the record out there, and then how long did it take before people start noticing or being played on the radio? At the time, there were many syndicated programs, radio station like Hard Space, and I think that record came to attention of Stephen Hill, if I remember correctly, and they start playing. Who is this kid? This music is very, very good, right? So it did. So people start calling you, and well, not calling you, but at the time we didn't have cell phone, but we had landline. So people start approaching you. Hey, you want to play this live, or who is this kid with this great music? We're coming out of nowhere in Los Angeles.
That's absolutely perceptive, and really, it's all part of the great stories around that time. But because I lived in this Culver City area, again, which was just inland from Venice Beach in West LA, West Los Angeles, a lot of artists, cutting edge, creative stuff happening everywhere, dance, music, jazz, all kinds of ambient, emerging ambient electronic, but that was a little more finely tuned and sparse. But as destiny or fate would have it, Michael Stearns lived about 1.5 miles from where I was living.
Wow.
So we somehow met up through the community there in Los Angeles at the time. There was a famous writer who used to be the guitar player for Tim Buckley, and that was Lee Underwood. And Lee Underwood became a really well-known writer for Downbeat magazine, and he was absolutely at the front edge of that whole sound in LA at that time with Tim Buckley, whose son was Jeff Buckley later on.
Yep.
And that, I'm sure. So, but Lee became a major proponent and absolute, enthusiast for this music. So he was starting to write about it as this emerging new genre, and he was starting to do a radio show. And I think I might have met Michael through Lee Underwood. But in any case, so I recorded the music, as I had mentioned, in my little tiny bungalow studio in Culver City. And then at a certain point, I started to learn about what you need to do to release an album on a cassette, which you need to master it, fine tune it a bit. So Lee introduced me to Michael. I think that's the way it went. But in any case, I'm over at Michael's with, almost like walking over there to his place. We live so close to each other. So he helped me out with one of the tracks and putting some eventide spatialization on it, helping me with that. The next thing I know, I meet up with Kevin Brahini, and he's working at another studio. And so I managed to do some more fine tuning on the master recording. And at that point I had the 3 tracks, and I said, well, these feel like they belong together. And then the feeling of Structures from Silence, the title came in, which is essential when that title for that music was born from me listening to it for 4 months straight with hardly any other music coming in. It's just, this is what it is. It's what I'm about at that time. So anyway, I got the master, found out the local cassette duplicating company and sent that material to him, and I paid a woman I knew to do the cover, and just basically produced the whole thing and did like 300 or 400 cassettes. And at that point, again, this is not Bandcamp. This is not the internet. This is not anything. This is like putting an ad in Option magazine for your CD. I mean, not CD, but for your cassette or your vinyl. And then you get a letter in your PO box. And then about 4 weeks later, the whole circle is complete. You get the order, you send it off, or you get the check and all that sort of thing. So eventually the whole road to Stephen Hill, though, the long story short is that he and Michael were already friends through Michael's music being played on Hearts of Space. So when Michael heard my music, he mentioned it to Stephen Hill. You need to hear Steve's music and this music that he's releasing. so at that point it was on a cassette. So I remember that Stephen was in Los Angeles visiting Michael, and I get probably a telephone call, or that's probably, yeah, I had the old landline, and we arranged, and he came by my little studio, and I still remember that whole thing like it happened yesterday. He's just there by himself, and tiny little apartment. I mean, it was not an apartment. It was a single, looked like a little gingerbread house, and it was right near the MGM film lot, and that's where all the MGM workers from the classic films from Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer would work, the grips and the guys developing the film. So it had this whole vibe of being in that kind of world as well, this real creative world. So Stephen rolls up and sits down in my living room, and he still talks about when I offer him a glass of water. You know, that's what we were serving up at that point. And he's sitting on a tiny little chair, and he had heard the music by that point. So we were just getting to know each other. And then he's the guy that then at that point introduced me to Ethan Edgecombe at Fortuna Records. And so we went from pretty quickly from me putting it out on cassette to Ethan and I meeting up. And Ethan was in Northern California in the Bay Area and had already put out some vinyl from some of the new age artists at that time in the Bay Area. And so very quickly we struck up a deal, and then Ethan put out Structures from Silence on vinyl. And then that's where it all started at that point, was that. And then that was around the same time as the producer from Chrysalis Records put out the Traveler album. That was the pieces we were speaking earlier about, the shorter pieces, but nothing like Structures at all. It was leading in another direction, but Structures was born kind of in the middle of that whole period where I was just exploding in all these different directions. But again, Structures was the piece that was my home. You know, that was my deep, quiet core that I would always return to almost every day, playing that kind of thing. So Ethan really responded to that, and soon after that I kept recording in that mode, and that's where the Quiet Music trilogy came from, right at that same time. So that was a long-winded answer there, but
you know, it's good to listen to hear to kind of stuff. So so the vinyl is out, people are more receptive, your music is playing in some radio programs, and you know, with it was mastered and from a cassette. Then I suppose that led to more concert, right? And then any kind of record label approach you, hey, Will, we like this. What else do you have?
right.
Where we like to play. That I suppose that record was the before and after of Steve Roach life, I suppose, right? Because
when I moved to LA, I mean, I hit the ground playing live right off the front. I mean, as soon as I moved there in 1980, 81, I was doing concerts all over West LA and Hollywood. And really, before I even had any music out, I was just out, putting sets together and playing in lofts and different settings like that. So, but certainly, the Fortuna was, to me, that was getting a record deal with a new age label, which at that time I really didn't have any attachment to whether it was new age or whatever age. It was a guy putting out my music on vinyl, and he was also putting out music that was relevant to what I was doing. So I knew he was also marketing to the right audiences, for meditation and the emerging audiences that would then embrace what was in America. It wasn't space music so much as new age, as a genre, which that's a whole other story, but I work in such a wide range. But Structures just was Structures. It's just music that lives in its own world and in its own time and space and place. So yeah, that just set everything again at another level of everything was set in motion. And then the other albums that I was working on, Western Spaces, were all created within a 3 or 4 year period. Traveler, Structures, Quiet Music, Western Spaces, Impetus, Desert Solitaire, that whole progression of albums all up through the 80s, all building up to Dreamtime Return.
At the same time, there was a market opening up for that kind of music because people like I don't know, like to do Pilates or meditation or yoga became very popular. Many gym open up in the 80s. You need to stay healthy, you need to start working out, and all the ladies will go to yoga, and then so that will be appropriate music, where people are doing meditation or yoga or even psychologists, using your type of music in the background where consulting with clients. So, you didn't have to, go to a concert of rock or pop. It was still a market for that type of music, right?
Right. I mean, it was really,
like we say soundtrack, the director looking for that type of music for film score, so.
No, that it was absolutely a explosion of opportunities for music that was being used in all these different realms that were about exploring the human potential, like the Stanislav Grof's holotropic breathing and the workshops that use music to support activation of these deep internal states where you're getting in touch with emotions and states of consciousness that you might normally think of as through psychedelic medicine, but there's using music to become the medicine, and that's been my big piece, is using music as a kind of a medicine in that way. And very, very big advocate of that, now, which is the power of music itself and the sound and the power of sound and as an essential element for opening up areas in your awareness and consciousness besides just pure enjoyment.
Absolutely. As you know, right, we live in crazy times, man, with the war in Israel versus Palestine, Ukraine versus Russia, and we live in crazy time, and music is love, man. If world leaders were to listen to music, I suppose that we will live in a place. We live in crazy time, and maybe the end of the world or World War III or whatever. Music has given so much satisfaction. Not art in general, the painting or the reading or poetry, whatever. I don't know. It's we live in crazy time, man, Steve. So
no, there's no absolutely, and there certainly hasn't been any less crazy, in times past. I mean, the things that our ancestors have lived through, and now, I mean, it is escalating, and the aspect that technology is driving that escalation is it's just absolutely clear that's happening. But it's just, ironic that the technology that's driving that world is driving, this whole other piece that we're connected to, and how you could create something of pure inspiration and beauty, and it gets out instantly into the nervous system of the planet. So, it's like a counterbalance, but that's a whole other piece there to go down the rabbit hole about what's happening in that sense.
No, absolutely, man. So after structure, of silence, I think I don't know. I think it's somebody. I don't know. There was a documentary. I don't know the name of the person. They have a project called, I think, Art of Dreamtime.
Yes.
And several months later, you and Stoll end up traveling to Australia. Yeah, feel free to elaborate, and the story better than I do. But there was a very good movie that I really like. Obviously, we're talking about Peter Weir, Last Wave. And by the way, the music is, I don't know if you know the composer that did the movie, the soundtrack for that movie.
For The Last Wave?
Yeah, from The Last Wave.
Yeah, I don't remember the name.
Yeah, he only did like that movie, by the way, had a great impact on me. Of course, I look at the soundtrack, and I forgot the name of who, but he ended up creating only like 2 or 3 vinyls. He worked in a music school, I think, teaching, and then eventually passed away. But it's not a well-known guy that did that record, that director. He,
Right.
struck on luck. I want to say luck, but it was the right place, the right time, working with Peter Weir, and created the music, which is, the movie is great, and of course the director and the movie itself is very, very good. We're talking about the Australian outback, and people trying to understand, dream, or everybody dreams a hour a day, but what happened when we dream and how we can recollect the dream, what's the meaning of from a psychological point of view, what happened in the dream. We try to, revive what happened in during the day for our lives and try to learn for it. And the two of you, you get a hold of you end up going to Australia and then eventually creating the next great record of yours, another masterpiece, right?
Yeah, that was certainly a confluence of all that we've talked about building. And then again, my connection to the states of awareness that I was at that time really, really breaking through into by spending time out in the Joshua Tree area outside of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So that would be my sanctuary, where I would go out often by myself and do what they would call in Australia as a walkabout, where you go out by yourself and you just set off and you start moving through the desert with some kind of guiding sense of something's taking you to a place. And I would end up in places out there that were extraordinary just through my intuition. And but ultimately the project Dreamtime Return, that was my next album. I'd already had created the title Dreamtime Return after I had created and released, I think it was Western Spaces, and the album Impetus. So I already had I still have them in my archives, the working cassettes that says Dreamtime Return. And I had received a book called Art of the Dreamtime, hardcover book by Josephine Flood, and it was from the anthropological study of Cape York and that region of Australia. When you're looking at the map of Australia, it's the point on the right side that goes up the peninsula, and that's it's rich all around that massive country. But there was just an abundance of quite unexplored and recently discovered Aboriginal sites and sacred sites and caves and great galleries of stories being painted out over all these years. So that's when I received the call from David Stahl, who had met up with producers at Ball State University who had the money to put together to do this documentary on the art of the Dreamtime. So this all happened in synchronistic form, where I'm already reading this book. I just had titled an album called Dreamtime Return with no intention of going to Australia. And a few months later, David Stahl calls. He hears Structures from Silence playing on the radio, driving at midnight through Texas to Mexico. He says, we need to use this kind of music for this documentary I'm doing and getting funding for in Australia. Would you be interested? And I said, when do we leave? That kind of thing, Wow. So he worked it out to where I was part of the whole expedition and the crew for them to use my music, whatever I would create. So that set the course for me to fly then to Australia and be part of the film crew. And, I'm recording sounds of the natural environment. I'm recording bees inside of trees, slowing them down. I'm recording rocks and out there. I'm picking up and making percussive sounds and just gathering that sort of piece. But what I'm really gathering is being flown out and dropped off into these remote sites in Cape York, which really there's maybe 4 or 5 dozen people had seen, anthropologists had been to these sites. And so we were able to fly in small planes and get dropped off, and they would pick us up several days later, and you'd be out on your own. And I mean, this was remote. If you got sick or something happened, they would just probably bury you out there because that's the end of it. So we were that far out, that in exploring on the ground, the rock art sites of the Aboriginal sacred sites there. And so that's all of that I absorbed by sleeping in the sites, by waking up, being there at 2 a.m, just with hundreds and hundreds of miles from any civilization, and you're in these sites, and you're able to travel in your imagination and in the feeling that you're sitting in these rock art galleries. The one gallery called Magnificent Gallery is this massive wall of stone that goes on for hundreds and hundreds of feet. And it just starts at one end and it just keeps evolving with all of this rock art all the way down thousands of years. You're just like you're really watching like a span of time unfold on this wall. So that's one of the pieces from Dreamtime called Magnificent Gallery. So you're just in a constant state for 3.5, 4 weeks of just being in complete time suspended awe and overwhelmed wonder of like this whole piece that's going on here, this whole like span of time and history and the Aboriginal documentation of that, up to the point where they painted this giant horse gallery, and it was at the point at which they first saw some sort of human form riding a horse up in through their land at the very first time. So you're seeing, all that sort of thing. So ultimately that all adds up for me into what you hear on Dreamtime. And there's just, you can't explain it. I can't really still, I can just hear what I brought through the nonverbal download of being in that space and being open to it, and then having this language of sound that I'm bringing through, and that's helping me to evolve it and to bring it through, is to being out of the safety of a studio, out of the safety of a community of people that and are supportive, or concerts, all that. None of that, it just all evaporated to nothing. And it was at that point just my own instincts and my own creative desires to bring through what was, and I'll use the term for today, which was downloading into me, or being absorbed into me, or being awakened into me while being, in this incredible, expedition with these guys.
And you mentioned the word synchronicity. Obviously, that's an important part of the guy hearing your music in the middle of the night, getting a hold of you, you going there, capture all the beauty, coming back to, pay after a month, putting the record album together, releasing the record, and then another notch.
Yeah.
I'm quite sure that opened a lot of doors, because now you have like the first, record that was structured, that, put your life in a different level. But then again, raise an arch a little bit, and you put you in another. So I'm quite sure that now a lot of people trying to get a hold of you, where you can play another record label. Now you were able to pay your bills, and your parents were not happy that that crazy life. What type of music is that you play with keyboards in the middle of the night? Or you were earning a living, so you were not poor.
That's a great observation.
So
the synchronicity, the fact that I was reading the Art of the Dreamtime book,
right,
and I already had the Dreamtime album title, but then that book was a reference book for the documentary that they were building. But and the side story where you were talking about, well, now I've at this level to where I have this momentum in my work and people are recognizing the work, and it was by no means did things get easier. It's just like in terms of just trying to support yourself, and it costs money to live and eat, and
that's right,
all that stuff. So it would just but it continued to more opportunities, of course, would open up, and labels at that time. I started, I moved over to work with Hearts of Space Records for a while, and then things evolve as they do. And then I started my own label, and around that time I started working with Project Records 30 years ago, it seems like now. Sam Rosenthal, and that's I can't say enough about Sam Rosenthal and Project Records. That's a marriage made in the universe of like collaborators who are really, he's an artist and a musician, and he's an astute businessman, and that guy, he is absolutely has so much integrity in how he runs the label. And if he does a royalty accounting, for example, and he was 3 cents off last period, you'll see the 3 cents show up now he's just that clear at that level. But just the way we've been collaborating and building our the catalog and working together on that, it's really, I feel absolutely blessed to work with Sam all these years.
Oh, so good for you, man. So from there, you start getting better, financially paying your bills, and it was a motivation to upgrade your gear at the time, get better equipment, or I'm quite sure, I don't know if some factories or brand name kind of approach you, hey, it will be great if, because you were, well, no, can you use this type of gear or that type of modulator, or, this kind of keyboard or whatever, right?
Yes.
What?
Yeah, that specifically that question in terms of being endorsed by
Yeah,
that never happened until only
Really?
very recently. I never had any endorsements, and I paid off the big loan, for the Oberheim.
yeah.
But that was, the early day was no Oberheim. That was the early ARP and Micromoog and Sequencer and ARP string ensemble. But eventually, another loan would come, and my mom and dad helped me out a little bit on getting the sacred Oberheim. But there were certain instruments that were, for me, iconic, absolute, like getting a Stradivarius violin if you're a classical player. There's a sound and there's an instrument that's going to help and inspire and take you to a whole other place that you're just absolutely possessed to be, connecting to. So the Oberheim OB8, that series of their analog synth, which I have right behind me here.
Yeah.
That was the sound of structures from Silence, and it became the sound that my voice that you would hear a great deal of in Dreamtime Return, along with the Oberheim Expander. So the Oberheim, the synth company, was also based right in Santa Monica. So they were building the instruments 4 or 5 miles from where my studio was, and I knew guys working there, and I was able to play prototypes of the instruments. So I did have the benefit of getting some discounts through them, but I never got the, the sort of endorsement deal. I think the one keyboard I got from Oberheim, ironically, was called an XK, and it didn't make any sound. You just used it to control something else with, So that was kind of fun. But ultimately, my path has always been about finding whatever tools that I'm drawn to, and without any allegiance to any manufacturers. I just want to have the freedom to use this for a while, and this is kind of, it's worn out its welcome now. This is not really a lifetime instrument for you. Like the Oberheim stuff, lifetime, take it to the grave, put it in the tomb with me or whatever when I go, the Oberheims. But and then eventually this ASM, a manufacturer that creates the Hydra synth, fantastic. I'm doing a promo for them right now with you, but it's an amazing instrument that really has a real heart and soul of the Oberheim, the way you can build patches and have really complex, really beautiful, evolving sounds. So they supported me with their flagship synth. But overall, I have this collection of synths that I've bought for all these years, and like in the time house here, this is the main room of the time house. Yep. And there's 2 more studios here. There's a live room, and then a smaller, I call the analog cave, where a lot of the big modular stuff is at. So it's it's just that's the joy of every day, waking up and having these creative options that you can dream into instantly, or configure different combinations of maybe instruments that were built 30 years ago combined with something that was just a brand new design of something that comes in. So that's the beauty now, is you can mix and match and like a painter, using different pieces of technology, where you might use computer, you might do some AI created stuff. You combine all these different organic elements and textures from 30 years ago. It's all it's all grist for the mill. It's all these amazing tools to go deeper and further and more expansive into activating what we're so lucky to be born with, if we're aware of it, is our level of perception and playing with how sound and music and other visuals in combination with that can just unlock and evolve you and change you in a really positive way.
Yeah. Nowadays, thank you. But nowadays, with $1,000, $2,000, you can buy, you can use Prolog tool, and with a fast computer, you can do everything in a computer nowadays. Not like before, back in the day, where you needed to buy expensive instrument and you need to go to the studio. There was $200 an hour to record a high engineer. Nowadays, people can do it. Do you go back to your analog days, so to speak, and then try to get sounds out of there as well, and not just a little bit of analog, right? Yeah.
I pretty much I've got one foot in analog world and then one foot in the digital world. But the point is that those worlds are all 100% hardware equipment.
Yeah.
Okay. I use no soft synths. I only use the computer to record and do arrangements in. And even now I'm doing a lot more recording live to a digital 2-track recorder at 2496, but I'm constructing it, playing, composing it, shaping it as you're hearing it.
I see. Yeah.
And so it's really staying connected to my early days of playing live and capturing it. But like the computer sitting here at the main console, I'm sitting on a 56-channel analog mixing board.
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
So the board is an instrument, and I play it like I do the instruments here all in the studio. So, but all the instruments are all patched into the board. So I have 56 channels of things happening that I can orchestrate and move and play with spontaneously. And I do record into multi-track, Mac system or whatever. And I can go in and I do a lot of, I'll take what I call magic tracks, which are these moments that happen in the studio that are live, and you're interacting with everything as it's unfolding, and it becomes so rich and so complete that to come back and drop in something, well, you can do that in certain places within the piece, but a lot of times it's so evolved and already at a really sophisticated level that's happening organically, and I'm capturing it. It's like taking a photograph of an incredible sunset, and rather than, well, I'm going to take a picture of just the clouds, then I'm going to take a picture of the light hitting the mountain, then I'm going to take a picture of the mountain, and then I'm going to take a picture of the grass. I want to take it all together and then have that experience of everything working together, while I'll then come back and maybe isolate some of the parts. I might take this breathing chord or this percussion thing and then take it and separate it. But there's a magic in capturing it all as a moment, as a moment that's just magic and absolutely, there that won't ever happen again. So that's a big part of how I work now.
After that, not a long time ago, you created in 2007, I believe, a great album. No, in the 2000, I don't remember. They called The Arc of Passion, yes, which is very good as well. Perhaps, I don't know, peak moment of pure flow. That's the best way I can describe it.
That's perfect.
It's another masterpiece, man. It's another very good album, man.
Well, thank you.
Another Steve Roach level up.
Well, The Arc of Passion really, that's a really, the titles that find their way into the music is really, it's very, very much like a key or a trigger point or a way to activate what is that whole album encompasses. So Arc of Passion is really like that feeling you enter into when I'm into that. That was all recorded live. That whole piece was recorded at a studio analog. It's now called Noise Bug, but they're a really cool analog synth store in Southern California that sells the modulars and all the hands-on gear. So they were doing concerts there for a while. It was like an art gallery space, but those kind of concerts where you set up, and there's a direction, and there's a flow, and there's sections I know I can drop into, but it's really like you're pushing off shore and then you're going for it, and then things start to happen, and then that arc starts to guide and take you, and then you go with it, and it reflects back, and you're instantly adjusting and adapting spontaneously. So in many respects, I like to call it spontaneous composition, because you're making really broad strokes and dramatic shifts, and you're not thinking twice about it when you're playing. You could be writing it out on paper, and okay, now I'm going to drop everything out and only leave this one sequence. And when I do that, I'm going to bring in this particular chord scale. And then, okay, I'm going to play that for a while. Then I'm going to bring back in what I dropped out, but add the drum machine at that point with it. Then I'm going to come back, add melodies, strip it all down to where there's nothing happening rhythmic, but one tiny pulsing, breathing hi-hat run through a phase shifter. And then I'm going to go to these really dark piano chords. Just what I explained is how I'm playing and improvising now, in that kind of flow all the time, just in that kind of place, So
Remarkable that you have the skill set to do that kind of stuff. Man. When I'm listening to music, I put my headphone, I drink a beer or two on a Friday or Saturday night, and
perfect.
I don't know how people do. I don't have that skill set. I'm a consumer of your product, man. I don't know how to write music or read music. I just like music, there's good music and bad music, and yours happens to be a very great music, man. So
well, thank you. What that process is, I mean, it's just something we're talking about this history, but it's the culmination of just the love of playing and the freedom of playing and selecting the right instruments. And again, the hardware instruments are so important to me. I could not do this with a couple of laptops. It would not be the same.
Yeah.
The connection, the visceral, knobs, all that good stuff there.
Yeah. Nowadays, young kids, and probably my son with 20, they live their life so fast, man. They download music, they go to whatever, Spotify, Bandcamp, or they pay the music. They listen 10 seconds for a track, next 10 seconds, next. That's crazy to live life like that, man. It's they listen to an album in 1 minute, right? And they are very critical of 10 seconds instead of like you and I, opening the album, look at the picture, the wrapping with a little knife, and look at the picture, the lyrics, and the photo with the CD the same. Take it to the car. Nowadays cars don't have CD player, man. I don't know. No. It's a different society altogether, man. It's I don't want to live like that. And with the internet, also, I was arguing with one guy the other day. I could write the stupidest article on the history of humanization of, and then people will say without even reading the article. It can be a stupid article, and people like to be as if human beings want to be part of something. They want to agree whether they read the article or they don't read the article, right? Or they see this interview, or then they, as if society put pressure to be part of a group, or I don't know. I don't want to live my life like that. Yes, Steve. I'm old school, man. What's the point? So we live
maybe old
Facebook, social media, or TikTok.
Maybe old school becomes new school at some point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Things circle back around. I mean, I never thought vinyl would have this kind of rebirth to where it's the largest selling medium of all of the music in the physical domain. So things like that come around, and I see the interest in new age music, to use that exact term, by audiences that are in their 30s, and they're discovering titles that were, to me, they were cool, but they weren't like real pinnacle releases of that time, but they're being rediscovered and explored. And the whole synth wave movement, that whole piece is coming around. So I think I'm still seeing, or I'm not still seeing, but I'm seeing, and you see it in the trends with instrument builders now, where they're bringing back instruments that you can have fun with and play and twist knobs and do things that are just going to happen maybe by chance. And of course, the modular synth world is just incredible, what that is doing to inspire people who are non-musicians, but they're creative and I mean, it's just, that's a blessing in that way, then that it's inspiring so much creativity. But there's so much being created right now. How do you find your way through it all? That's the part that's bewildering. And for myself as well. If I go to, I have very specific amount of time I listen to other music, but I'm either working and listening to what I'm working on, or listening to silence or the sound of non-musical reality, and hearing sound, and just, there's got to have time to rinse out, rinse my ears out, and just to feel and to hear without the influence of everything that's demanding your attention. There's so much demanding our attention at all moments, here now.
Yeah, so 3 years ago, you end up releasing another great album. I think it's called The Sky Opens. It's a live, 150, 60 minutes. I mean, that's playing live and, bringing different pieces for different periods of your life. And that's
Sure.
another masterpiece, man. Feel free to
Thank you. Well,
how that came together.
Yeah, that was the next. I've played in Grace Cathedral in 2007 in San Francisco, a beautiful, very large Gothic style cathedral. And then that series came along, the Ambient Church series, and that particular concert in Pasadena was my first big Ambient Church series with those guys. And that was a moment in time. That was just a confluence, again, like we're talking about, where it's an incredible audience. And you hear how the album starts. It's just coming back to LA after all of those years, and it's coming home since, into a place where I struggled and made it through all of the different levels of things that could have devoured me, and got back there alive, but with, my evolution of my music. And, walk out to that audience, an amazing audience, full cathedral church, and everybody just acknowledged me, like just before I even played a note. And then the first note that I was going to play was Structures from Silence, start with that in the church with everybody. And I'm just thinking the whole time, please remember the first three chords, because it was so incredible. And it's like, man, it got quiet as a pin drop. And those chords are pretty straightforward, but you could slightly mess one note up, and then it would, it was at that level of like being so in the present moment. It was fantastic, that whole.
You get nervous still nowadays?
Zero. Yeah.
Playing live?
No, I thrive. I thrive on playing live. My heart rate seems to go slower when I play live now. Something like that. I was anxious, but I just feel so comfortable playing live, and I enjoy it and so deeply, and I just crave it. I'm just like almost running out there to do it, So the main piece about playing live for me that's challenging, like eventually I went to New York City and played at the Church of the Heavenly Rest there next to Guggenheim, but I had to fly. I had to take my system and reduce it down a bit, because normally I have a cargo van with, all the hardware gear. And I still played with all hardware gear in New York, but I had to minimize it a bit. And then a cartage company came to my house and flew all the gear back there. So that felt safe, because they do bands and things like that.
Yeah.
Still, that's a challenge to be a hardware performing artist in a software laptop based world for flying and doing concerts. And so, I toured Europe for 12 years, and I would fly 12 giant road cases to Dusseldorf or to, Holland or wherever, Netherlands. And back in the 90s right up to 2001 at 9/11, I could fly stuff all over the world and afford to do it. And then after that, everything changed. It became really not only more expensive, but they would open up the cases and pull stuff out and throw it back in, and it would get broken. And so that changed the European touring dramatically. So now most of the concerts that I do are on the ground, or I'm planning concerts now for Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, which I can drive in 2 days from here and have my full complement of all my favorite instruments, which is essential. So that's why the concerts become more events, and why people say, when are you going to play in Lincoln, Nebraska, or somewhere in like, I mean, I'll never play. I have to play in large metropolitan cities so that people can fly in there and experience that. That's how it's really going to happen. I can't, with the way I work, I can't afford. I mean, I can't afford, and the promoters can't afford to fly all this gear to, smaller or medium-sized cities for that reason. So it's either that, if I reduce my
Gear.
setup down to where it's small enough to fly, nowadays it's going to be, it could happen, and I'm trying to do that, but there's a bit of compromise because I can't fly with the Oberheims, the larger Oberheims and that kind of thing. And then shipping it ahead of time. I mean, there's just, as you see, there's a lot of complications there. Now, that's why when I'm playing in the Southwest or Grace Cathedral in California, or we're talking about Chicago in the fall, so that could happen. And then that would have people who live in that part of the world would just say, this is where we have to go if we're going to see the concert. But yeah, that's, it feeds the music dramatically, playing live all the way till it's not on as a physical release, but the ambient church, the church concert I did in Los Angeles this year is another really high, that kind of high moment in time. So those concerts really feed and evolve the music.
Absolutely, yeah. Tangerine Dream, they end up touring here in the United States. They went back to Europe last week. And feel free to elaborate. How is it to, they were in town, obviously. We need to get a hold of, Roy Rich. We need to get a hold of, in your case, yourself, Steve, to play with them. How is it to play with Yoshiko and Thorsten and then Paul Frick, supporting Tangerine Dream? It was unbelievable experience, although some people complain, well, it's not Tangerine Dream, the old guys are not part of the band anymore, some die and so on, but
I got plenty to say about that for sure. But for me, honestly, they were not currently on my radar until like recently, when I heard they were coming to Tucson, and I'm so consumed in my world. It's not like I've gone out of my way not to hear what they're doing. I'm so working 24/7 with all the different projects, and my exclusive page. We can talk about that if you want, where I have albums that come out once a month for subscribers there.
Yeah.
And so in any case, have a really very full life. So they were coming to Tucson, and my wife, Linda Kohanoff, is a violist, and she heard there was a violin player, and she was really fascinated to see how they were going to work that into their group. And I hadn't really heard any of the albums of recent. And so we bought tickets, and I was just ready to go and experience the concert that way, just walk in. And I'm in my hometown, and
sure,
and all that good stuff. And it's right across the street from where I've been doing this monthly ambient lounge series at this historic hotel in downtown Tucson. It was all just felt like a nice, fun night. Well, then I heard this interview with Marius Christian Brucha on Journeys to the Infinite. Do you know his show?
Yeah, he's very good at what he does.
He does a brilliant job. And so I heard the interview with Thorsten and heard his whole story and history of being in Tangerine Dream for 20 years, and then mentoring with Edgar for 8 years, living with him, studying under him, getting the guidance for the future. And that really lit me up. That was very, very inspiring. And I didn't have an attitude at that point, in any case, that this was not Tangerine Dream. I just knew that they had been evolving while Edgar was alive. They were adding, saxophone, other kinds of instruments, and just, kept evolving. But when I heard any of that, I heard like when they were doing the larger group material, it was cool, but I just wasn't compelled. And it wasn't a matter of like, I want the old days. It's just while they're evolving. And there was periods during Tangerine Dream when it was Edgar, Chris, and Johannes. Small, there was periods there where it was cool, but I just wasn't drawn to it. Because I'm so consumed in
your own stuff. Yeah, of course.
But I'm always looking for things that'll light me up. But in any case, I heard the interview, and then I just at that point, I was just really moved and inspired to just write Torsten a letter for nothing more than to say, I have great respect for you and what you're doing and how you're carrying the weight. There must be a lot of weight to carry forward with how the expectations are with the group and the history. And, I just want to congratulate you on what I feel like you're doing a brilliant job. By that point, I had heard the ROM album, which is a brilliant album. Really, that
Absolutely.
yeah. Just when I heard that, it was like, okay, I'm signed back up again with these guys. This is inspiring.
Good for you.
No, I was absolutely. I just played it over and over again. I was getting chill bumps listening to it, which is a good sign. But it was none of this had anything to do with what would eventually happen about 2 weeks later. So then I wrote Marius a quick email, and I said, can I get Torsten's email from you? And then he said, well, I'll just email Torsten just to confirm that I can share his email with you, and which is cordial, what we all do. And then he emailed back and he said, well, actually, he's been trying to get a hold of you for about the last month, maybe through my Facebook page, which I have friends that help me run that page, but I'm not checking my emails there that much. So anyway, I sent him a nice letter, and then he emailed back and was really moved by that, and just really casual, friendly, great, exchange. And then he said, would you want to join us in Tucson in our sessions that we do at the end of the set?
Correct. Yeah.
And I said, absolutely, let's do it. I'm there, no problem. Boom, that was it.
Yeah.
So, and that was the last email I had with him 6 weeks before they played here. So I didn't know. And then I saw an interview because they were out touring, and I know when you hit the road there, I mean, the things they were experiencing with all the way along, breakdowns and
breakdown, the bass, yeah.
I just knew that we were going to meet. Even in Albuquerque, they were 3 hours late. They were broken down. I had people waiting in line who knew I was playing with them. Said, well, they're not even here yet, and it's 8:00, and they're getting brought in with the school bus. And I'm like, that night before, my truck's already loaded, my van. I have all my full setup I use for all like the big church concerts. I have the full setup. They're ready to go. And I didn't know if they were going to even make it there on Sunday. I hadn't heard from anybody. I assumed they were because there's too much on the line with ticket sales. But in any case, I didn't want to get in the way of anything. I knew that when they rolled in, we would meet. And I had already looked online and saw that you sync up with a MIDI clock between his machines and mine, where you get the sequencers clocked up, you pick a key, and then you go. So that's how we met each other. We met each other. They rolled in about the same time. We started loading in. I met the band. Really, we just immediately were relaxed and felt really like, I know these guys. We know each other. We were just completely, oh, this is cool, and oh wow, and here we are. And they weren't stressed out from from whatever happened. They had it pretty well together there. They were tired and stuff, of course. But so anyway, we just proceeded to set up, and they set me up. If you see the pictures, like right out in front, sort of with them surrounding me, and I have my full system, which is all of my hardware gear there. I've had with me for all these years. And so we talked about a key, and that's it. We didn't talk about where we were going to start it or where we were going to go or anything. We just picked a key and a MIDI clock, and then boom, hour later, it just started happening. It started happening in sound check. We were playing, and we were all looking at each other with these really big smiles, and we just stopped and said, let's just keep it in the bottle. This is happening, and just come back out at the end of their set. They announced me, it was exciting. It was exciting, but I felt really, like I said in some other interviews or with John DiLiberto at Echoes, that it was like a Kairos moment. That's like this meeting of time and destiny where things along the road, they come together and it just feels right. It's not like, well, I've been waiting for this, or I had, 4 months ago, I had not a single clue I would be on stage with those guys. Or did I even think about it? Or did it seem like, wow, wouldn't that be great? It wasn't nowhere on the radar at that point. But then once it came in, it was like, this seems like it's like meant to be, natural. Just the way we were gelling, the way we were playing off of each other. And it was so cool that when through the course of the after sound check and we were hanging out some more and talking, waiting in the afternoon atmosphere of Tucson, and one thing led to another, and let's do it tomorrow night in San Diego again. Boom.
That's right. You want to, man. That's great story, especially that you met Edgar, or you look, like you say, you look up to a giant.
Yeah.
You know, when you were young, and Edgar Frost, a big guy, and you are very tall, but you don't know, looking up in terms of, what
stature.
Edgar Frost meant in statue meant in electronic music, and now you were playing with the descendants, so speaking of the big man. So
right, and then the irony of that story, or not the irony, but to me the beauty of it, and I was telling that story to the band, was that where we're playing tomorrow night in San Diego is in El Cajon, and it's 3 miles from where I started everything, in that little apartment.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it was right. I mean, I could almost point it out to him and see up there. I showed him the hillside. I said, that's where my first studio was, where I had the picture of Chris, Edgar, and Peter on my wall saying, there's room for me to do this with you guys. I said that to the picture.
Wow.
So it was a moment. So then when we announced it on Facebook. So, I have a lot of, friends, not family really anymore, but a lot of friends in San Diego and El Cajon, and the word got out pretty quickly that I was going to play with them. And that was a moment when I walked out right there, 3 miles from where it all started. I mean, that was one of those deals that, it's like it can choke you up pretty easy, that whole piece, just the emotion around that. And then the next night, since we had played the night before, we had some things figured out in terms of headphone mixes, and things were just more relaxed. And, I was ready to go to LA the next day, but I just I felt like, well, let's just not overstay the welcome here, and we just wished him farewell, and boom, So, but we had a great, just great connection. And we talked, that night afterwards, hanging out about maybe something happens in Europe if I get over there, who knows what, it's just the way things roll. And in terms of more of those Kairos moments, the meeting of time and destiny, certainly can continue on. But no, it was absolutely just, fantastic. And then so the piece about Tangerine Dream, are they Tangerine Dream or are they something else? Well, it's not Tangerine Dream 2.0. It's the evolution of the original Tangerine Dream to me.
Yeah.
And that's like saying, well, when Syd Barrett, went off the deep end, and then it was no longer Syd Barrett, is that no longer Pink Floyd? In terms of the original founder having moved away, because the guys, you have Chris, who came in later on, but you have Klaus and Conrad Schnitzler, or the early members. Wasn't Conrad? I think he was an early member.
Yeah, he was early. Yeah, they were
very early. I mean,
they could play over, I don't know, like 100 people, different people.
Yeah, in the Zodiac Club. But I mean, and Edgar, he passed that on to Torsten with 8 years of knowledge, and then was in the band
20 years. Right? Yeah.
So why would Torsten be any less a member than Peter Baumann or Chris or Hans Smalling or all of those guys? I mean, right, Edgar has moved on, but the piece I have think of is in Barcelona, you have the Sagrada Familia, right? The beautiful.
That's right.
And so that's 300 years in the making. That's cathedral thinking. That's cathedral.
Absolutely.
That's what, Antonio Gaudí trained people. So when he died, they would keep his vision alive. And that's what, to me, Tangerine Dream is about cathedral thinking in a musical context, where they keep evolving.
Yeah, it's my understanding that Edgar Frost's will, if you will, wish was for the band to continue, and Torsten was there in the band, and then Yoshiko came later, and then Paul Frick started playing with them like 4 or 5 years ago. So it will continue. It's a great music, and it's people like it. I saw them twice a couple of weeks ago, and the show was great. We have a great time, and the music was great, and whether Klaus or Peter Bauman or this or that, where they are now, it's completely irrelevant. I enjoy my time. I had a great time. And,
Right.
and plus, not only they played the recent album that it was released a couple years ago, but they went back to the previous stuff, as you know, right? They were playing,
Yeah, and I mean
stuff from the early records, so it was Tangerine Dream. So
yeah, and they
was amazing.
retooled it for today,
That's right. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's just, I mean, I heard when Chris Squire, right before he passed away, he spoke of Yes as I would like to know that Yes will be around in 200 years, playing with classics and new pieces written in the style of Yes.
Oh, and so, absolutely, yeah.
In that sense, it's like an orchestra that continues on with, the conductor, which is Torsten, and then they keep evolving but honoring the original.
Absolutely, yeah.
Of that, so that's really, to me, my feeling about that.
Absolutely. Steve, I know I have taken almost 2 hours of your time, and it was very nice talking to you, man. I'm quite sure we'll do when you have time, we can do a part 2 and part 3 and revisit in different periods and different records. But you're doing the right thing, man. Your dad that felt that you were doing the wrong thing by playing that weird music in your room and being the only child staying in your room by yourself, playing keyboard and doing this and that. What is that kind of stuff, But they raised you well, they did the right thing, and your mom, like you mentioned, you got a feeling, let the kid alone, let he do his.
You got it, man. You're tracking it. So it's interesting because I have a documentary that was just finished. It was 4 years in the making, a documentary.
Yeah.
That is coming out. It's called Life in the Sound Current, and it's in a lot of film festivals now, but I'll make sure you're aware of that. But it really
I will check it out. I will check it out.
To what it talks about the whole piece with my mom and dad, but then the evolution from that time period of what we were facing. But in closing, I know we're moving along here, and I mean I can talk I play 4 and 5 hour concerts, so interview. We could go on. Be careful now.
I will take your word for it.
but my new album, Sanctuary of Desire, it's coming next Friday, and the video will be released on Monday. But this album really is a pinnacle moment right now and I feel like another one of these Arc of Passion type moments,
really,
where it's combining the two worlds that I love so much, and it's combining the two worlds that I love so much, the more drifting, diaphanous breathing space, and then this too is the fabric of time weaving with you could call it sequencer music, but to me it's beyond that now. But that album, just want to make sure that you really you get a handle on that real quick, because I'm really proud of that. And so the Sanctuary of Desire really speaks to this place that we're in here, this studio space where it's my sanctuary to pursue and explore and really take it as far as I can, at every moment. So that's coming.
Well, that's the motivation, inspiration to do part 2 then, now that the album's coming out. So I need to send you an email. Time to
let's talk about that. There's some big stuff there. So
Then again, Steve, it was very nice talking to you, man. You're a great guy. Keep on doing what you're doing, man. You're a gifted guy that came from not rich family and humble means, and you have done very well for yourself, man. So we need more Steve Roach in this world, man.
Well, I appreciate your appreciation of that and your awareness of that, and the music is the piece that lives on and inspires future
generations, man. Absolutely,
future generations to keep creating from a really pure and authentic space. So thank you for recognizing that.
No problem, man. I will send you an email because I'm interested in getting several vinyl that you have, and then we'll work it out. All right.
Yeah, let's be sure to do that. The vinyls are here. Yes.
Yeah, Steve, it was very nice talking to you. Good luck to you. And if, by the way, I'm interested in visiting your studio if you are in Arizona one day. But if you happen to be in Washington D.C., feel free to come to dinner. My wife is the best cook in the world, man.
Okay,
Latin music, Latin food.
We'll take each other up on that in either coast there. So thanks again. It's an honor, and I appreciate your depth of knowledge. And
no problem.
And your questions were great. So thank you.
Thank you. Have a great evening down there,
You
man.
too. Well,
Bye.
see you again.
See you, Steve. Thank you.